Now, without further ado, let's welcome Susan Minaya, COO and Chief Learning Strategist at Minaya Learning. Susan, the webinar stage is yours.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. So I'm really looking forward to this session today. And thank you so much, Kristen and ELB Learning, for inviting me. I'm going to pull up my screen here really quick so we can get ourselves set up and get ready to go. So we're going to have a very interesting conversation about learning strategy today, and I can't wait to hear from you. So we have a couple polls and we have some Q&A interactions and things. So I hope that you do participate in chat. Kristen's going to be my webinar sidekick today and kind of keeping us on track there. So thank you so much in advance for your participation. So really, I'm here today because learning strategy is a passion for me. I have been doing learning strategy work as a learning leader in organizations or companies that I worked with, and also as a consultant for many years. And I just find so much value in learning strategy, but I've found that there's kind of a mystique about it for a lot of people. And so really, this is something that I still get so energized about it. It's really one of the favorite things that I do with learning organizations. And, learning strategy and knowing when and how to use it really is a game changer. And that's why I'm here today. That's why I like to evangelize about this because, really, you don't have to go to school to do learning strategy work. You don't have to pay lots of money to get a certification. When I work with people on learning strategy development, I really encourage them to work alongside me because you can do this yourself, right? So sometimes you just need someone to kind of help show you the way and the frame up, So really my goal here is to hopefully empower you to do your own learning strategies within your learning organizations because I just really care that as learning professionals, we're the strongest we can be for the organizations that we serve. So what is a learning strategy? So the first thing I say is, what do you see on this picture here? What are you looking at? So on the left side, is really this chaos, right? This spaghetti bowl of people going in every direction, and the difference between, I think the thing here on the right-hand side, what you have is when everyone is marching in the same direction. So when we're looking about learning strategy, it's that target in the middle. It really keeps us very focused on what the work that we're doing within the learning organization. We're clear about what it is we're trying to achieve, the business goals that we're trying to support. But when we don't have that strategy, life can be chaotic. We can find ourselves in order taker mode within the organization. I've been there, I understand that. And you have a lot coming at you at a very high velocity and you just can't get your arms around it. But once you get a learning strategy put together, you're able to kind of really lead your learning organization in a much calmer and more concerted way. So really, it's like if you don't have a strategy, you kind of are probably looking like the spaghetti bowl on the right. But and the difference a lot of times between a learning strategy and a strategic plan, because people ask me this a lot, but it's really there's similarities there, but really a learning strategy is how you're optimizing the learning and development organization specifically within the organization, which is the broader strategic plan for the organization, and how you're going to be supporting that from a learning and development standpoint. Simplistically put, it really focuses on kind of the current state is the work that you're doing through this process. What are the impacts of the way we're doing things? How is it impacting us? What should we be doing in future state? And what are we going to gain by doing that so that we can really make the case for the work that we want to do and achieve the funding that we need to get to do that work. So I'd like to start, if we could, Kristen, if we could put up the first poll. And I'm really curious with the people that are on today, has anyone really ever created a learning strategy before?
We're getting some great responses. Close to full participation. Almost there. 27 people have responded. 28. Thanks so much, everyone, for participating. This makes life so much easier, especially on Susan. So I think not bad. 29 people out of 34 have responded. We're going to end the poll and share the results.
So exciting. All right. So here we have, like, 2/3 of you haven't and a third of you have. So you've done it in some form or fashion. And really, this is not uncommon. Like, and there's no wrong answer here, right? So it's like today, hopefully, as you kind of get more of a peek behind the curtain of what's going on with learning strategy work and really gain some confidence that you're able to do this yourself, that number will change, right? So I think I go next. I still have you showing on my screen here, Kristen.
Interesting. I have ended the results.
Well, let me just go back and share. I'll pull it back up again. All right. Problem. All right. So here we are, back where we started. So thank you for sharing that. And there's so many people that haven't done learning strategy work. So what I'd like to do is kind of start delving into, so what does it take to do a learning strategy? So I'm an ATD certified professional in learning and development. So I definitely ascribe to the ATD capability model. And this is a great model developed by the Association for Talent Development that really highlights for learning professionals 3 different dimensions and the critical skills associated with them that you need to be kind of that perfect learning and development professional. So many of you here today are probably familiar with the model, and some of you may not be, but it's really easy to find. So if you just go to atd.org/capability-model, you'll be able to learn all about it. But as we look at this model, you can see that there's 3 domains. There's the personal and capability side. We're talking about communication, emotional intelligence, collaboration. You can see all the different capabilities listed here. And then there's professional that really looks at the skills and competencies, if you will, for our craft, what we do as learning professionals. And then there's the organizational, which really focuses on really business insight, kind of that consultative lens that we have, change management, performance management, data and analytics. So all these things together are kind of like the holistic view of the learning professional. I think we're going to talk a little bit more about this as we go through, but I just kind of want you to anchor this in your mind, because at the end, we're going to talk about what do you think is the most important for learning strategists, okay? So let's get started, and we're going to talk about the types of learning strategies. So, when you're looking at learning strategies, there's essentially 3 different types of learning strategies that you can have. There's the learning organizational strategy, right? That really looks at the entire learning organization. That's from your infrastructure, your resources that you have. What are your content strategies? I buy, I build, I outsource, I bring in contractors, whatever that strategy is, and the processes that you use to actually manage the workflow through your organization, like your intake, and then how you're reporting out on results and things like that. So that's a very comprehensive strategy that's very powerful. If you've not done something like that for your learning organization before, it's a great way to really start getting your arms around the learning and development work within your organization and starting to really take the reins for the work that your organization is doing that's most effective for the organization to meet their goals. The second one is really the initiative type. So, when you look at like the initiative piece, you have things like system implementations, if you will, right? So here we have you have like a system implementation where it's a brand new, how do I want to say, like a customer service implementation, or a new operational system that comes into the organization that touches a lot of different people throughout the organization. It seems like if any of you have had this experience in your organizations and you're in the learning organization that has to support that, that sometimes things get left out, right? Because we haven't done the strategic work up front to really see how are we best going to roll this out, train the people within the organization to be able to use it. Because the truth is that if everybody isn't like trained properly, people get left out of the training equation. In my experience, the people who typically get left out are the back office people in accounting or something like that, because nobody thought about them. They all thought about the salespeople that are going to be touching the system, or the customer service reps that are touching it. So that's an example of an initiative type of a strategy. And then the third one is a functional strategy, right? So here it might be about how do we develop our leadership development for the organization for leaders at all levels? How are we strategically training our salespeople, like from end to end, like from the initial people out to the highest level of professionals? So these are just three examples of that. But the thing is that they all, even though maybe the organizational is super big and like very comprehensive compared to maybe the other two, the point is that the work and the framework for creating the strategy is really the same. So you're going to use that same kind of framework to be able to do your strategy. So Kristen, I'm curious, let's just check in of this 3 strategies for those who have done, or maybe those who haven't and are considering it. Which one have you done or are you planning to work on? An organizational strategy, learning strategy, an initiative learning strategy, or a functional learning strategy?
We have wonderful responses coming in, fast and furious. It's a great, I mean, we're looking at an even, I shouldn't say split because there's 3 options, but it's looking pretty even, neck and neck right now between organizational and functional.
Nice.
We have 27 people who have responded. Can we get a couple more? All right, I will stop stalling. Here we go. End poll. Share results. There you go.
Wow. So it really is almost neck and neck, right? So most of the ones that have been done are really at the organizational level, the initiative, and then, I mean, the functional and then the initiative. So that's fantastic. Look at organizational and functional are kind of neck and neck, which makes a lot of sense, right? Because typically organizations are so focused on things like leadership development. That makes a lot of sense there. And organizationally, just for learning organizations, as we'll learn today, the value of that organizational strategy for them for lots of reasons, which we're going to discuss. Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. All right, so now that we have it, where I want to take you next is let's take a look at the value of it and really building relationships, right? So I can testify up and down the value of learning strategy work in building partnership and relationship with executives and managers, everyone who you're serving, your internal clients across the organization, right? And, so I think I'm going to just want to share this briefly. I'm not going to pull it up right now, but, how many of you here would say that you really are truly a strategic partner with your executive business stakeholders? And when I say that, it's like, are you at the level of executive leadership, CHRO level, divisional level, where you're really collaborating with them in a strategic way, focused on organizational goals and initiatives and how that division is going to be able to achieve that? So, because when they plan for their budgets every year, are you part of that discussion? Are you in there talking about what it is we're going to do as a partner, as a real strategic partner, to say, how are we going to change your performance of this organization to achieve our strategic goals for the organization? And I think too, these are such critical conversations that you need to be having. So I'm curious, what level are you at? Who are you interacting with for the strategy work that you develop? So Kristen, poll 3, I think, really talks about, are you really having conversations at that executive level, at the mid-management level? Are you really at the learning and development kind of teams just sort of doing it themselves?
And the results are coming in. Once again, fast and furious. We appreciate everyone who's responding. Makes it a lot more fun this way.
It does. It's more exciting. And it just helps us understand where you are as participants too.
Definitely. Wow, and we're really close to full participation with everybody who's on today. So we're going to end the poll right about now.
Yep. Okay. And this is because what's interesting about the results, if you're at the top saying I'm at the executive level, congratulations, good for you. Because that's really where you want to be. Those are the conversations and the people that you want to be having these strategy conversations with. But you know what? If you said no and you're within your L&D team or your mid-management team, you know what? That's okay too, because there's lots of people that are there. So just, I think often learning and development feels like an order taker and more reactive, mostly because we don't have those very strategic discussions with the people in the organization that are driving strategy. So we talk about getting that seat at the table, and I'm always very careful about using that term because I think it's kind of been run into the ground. But I mean, if you think about it, you can position yourself as a strategic partner and be more proactive. So how do you get there, right? So you can't get there unless, number one, you know the business. And so kind of this is the first point I really want to share about being an effective learning strategist and kind of being that strategic partner with your business clients internally, right? Because you can't just know about learning and development. It's not enough. I mean, you can advise them on that day in and day out because you're in that organization, because that's your skill and your craft, right? But if you're going to be strategic and really help the business drive performance, reduce their time to proficiency, help achieve the broader organizational goals, you really have to understand what defines success for your business, right? So, and for the company, right? And the learning and development, you really are the enabler to help make that happen. And I think this is kind of the mindset that you need to have. It's like, they're there, they can do everything all day, but really it's all about performance. And guess what? As a learning organization, you're in charge of workplace performance, right? The individual performance of the workforce. And so you really are in this wonderful catbird seat, if you will, to be able to help drive performance in the organization. What you have to do is really help your business, your internal clients understand that you are that enabler. And by partnering with you, being that strategic partner, you can help them achieve their goals, right? And really, that is your value proposition. So how do that's when people start to listen. When you start talking the language of the business and not talking the language of learning, they're going to hear what you have to say. And so this is probably one of the most powerful things I learned as a learning professional is how not to talk about training, but to talk about the business. What are you trying to achieve? And wow, how could we help you with our expertise achieve that goal through your employees? So as we move through this discussion, you're going to see how you can engage your business stakeholders. We're going to talk a lot about that today, and to become strategic partners with you in the learning strategy. So I'm going to give you an example of how I did this in my career. So everybody has a story, so I'm going to tell you my story, right? So I was a new learning manager for an insurance company, and I had just been hired, and they were opening a brand new 500-seat call center. And I was super excited because I have a lot of experience in call centers, training and development and supporting clients in that area. And this was just 2 months after I started. They said, "Oh, we're opening that up in the middle of in July." So I had to start working. And what I realized is that the company I joined, the learning organization, nothing was documented, nothing was consistent. Everybody, all the trainers had all the knowledge in their head. Everybody just did everything the way they did it because they were in that call center and that was kind of their domain and their ecosystem. And so they did what they did. I was mortified. I was like, how are we going to be able to do this and train these new people in this new location, these trainers, how to be able to effectively train the way we need to do it, right? Well, essentially we did it, but that's not my story I want to tell you, because that was brutal. It was grueling. We actually pulled it off. We made it work, which was amazing. But that's when I realized this is not okay. We have got to change the way we're doing things and putting it together. So after the dust settled, I realized that really the velocity of change in the call center environments, because there was a lot of technology stuff going on at the time. You know, you're trying to squeak out the last little bit of proficiency with the with the agents that were in the center. And if we did not find a better way to get on top of that, we were going to be chasing our tails, right? The way we were doing it was not effective. And not only that, but there was so much negative feedback from our business clients, like our call center leadership team, the executive. They were like, it wasn't good. And I knew that. And I'm like, I just bought into this job. This role, and we have like a terrible reputation. Like, we have got to change this, right? So they were telling us that we needed to be more efficient, we weren't flexible, we were very rigid, it didn't work with the business and the way they wanted things to be able to go. It took forever to get people out of training and get them so that they could get up and running, and so that they were actually proficient on the job. So then there was that. Never mind, they get trained, but then when they're out, they're not even really that proficient. Well, a lot of people struggle with that. And so I listened, right? So I said, okay, we have to do something different. So others called it complaining. For me, it was like manna from heaven. I'm like, all right, you know what? There were things, these are things we could fix. We could fix this stuff. But words like efficiency and flexibility and quality, when you hear them, those are strategic buying signals from your client screaming at you as a learning professional to help them. And you need to hear it like that, right? So these are things that you actually can change, right, when you work together. So this was our window of opportunity. So we really set out to develop a learning strategy, and that did in fact offer our business stakeholders the results they were looking for, essentially through the strategy that we developed. And you'll see some examples of what the strategy contained in the samples that we're going to show today, but really helping them see a totally new way of being able to train their people. We're not going to herd train everybody. People are going to come in, and then when they're ready, if they move faster than everybody else, they move faster, they get out onto the floor, they do the work. And so it was like a game changer. I cannot tell you, we reduced overall training time by 30 to 50%, depending on the line of business that we were supporting. And it also decreased our time to proficiency from anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks in training for them to get up to speed to full proficiency. So it was huge, but it was very much a performance-based model. And because they lose people all the time in call centers, the turnover rate is very high. We needed a system that would accommodate that, people coming in not have to wait for a class of 10 or whatever for us to be able to run a class. It was monumental for them. So built into that strategy, though, I have to tell you, was a really powerful thing called governance. Because you know what, as a learning strategist, your goal is to make the learning and development of the workforce a partnership with your business stakeholders, right? Not training's job, it's our job, right? And so that really ensured ownership and results for us were collective, right? So if things weren't working, we collectively talked about what do we think the reason is, why, and we fixed it, right? So it really was a thing of beauty, because we were at their standing meetings, quarterly executive meetings with the executives for the organization. We created a scorecard to talk about performance results and what was happening. So we were definitely in hip-to-hip partnership with our business stakeholders and our executives, right? So we became strategic partners, and it was all because of that learning strategy. So now that you understand the value of learning strategy and really how it can be used as a tool for building strategic relationships with your business stakeholders, I want to talk to you about some of the key elements of a learning strategy. So I think we have a little bit of time. Kristen, has anybody posted anything in the chat that we should address or speak to?
Not as of yet. I think everybody is just actively learning. But if you
Okay.
would like me to, I could take the Mastering the Art of Learning Strategy link and pop that in there so people can also follow along.
Yep, we're going to be talking about that in just a few minutes, So let's go ahead and talk about it, because that's why everybody's here, right? So what are the key components of a learning strategy? So you understand the importance of it. Now let's talk about the mechanics of it. I told you earlier, regardless of the 3 types of strategies that you're doing, there's a framework. And this framework is important regardless of which of those types that you're doing. First off, as we talked about before, you really have to understand the business goals. And I would say that if you don't feel comfortable about understanding business goals, I posted on LinkedIn like maybe a month and a half ago. I talked about one of the greatest capabilities a learning professional can have is vulnerability, is being able to say, we know it isn't working, just like what happened to me. We know things are broken, and being able to go and talk to your business leaders about how can we change this? What do we need to do differently? What do you think we're doing well, and that type of thing. And then what do we need to do maybe differently? And then also, what are you trying to achieve? And let's talk about how we can help you get there, right? So this is where you really need to go, because understanding the business goals is how you're going to attach your learning and development results to their business goals. And that's how you're going to measure the effectiveness of your strategy and your overall success. So this information is really essential for you to understand as a first step to the strategy, because otherwise we're just training to train, right? I have a mantra that I always tell people, that if it's not for the business, we really serve no purpose, right? As learning professionals, there's no reason for us to be here. We're here to help them and their workforce perform better. That's our job. That's why we're here. That's our mission. And so we need to do that in partnership with them. So when we understand their business goals and their pain points, we can better figure out how to support that. So then you're going to say, okay, this is where you want to be. Now let's look at where we are, right? So now we're going to talk about current state. And this takes really a lot of reading, a lot of talking, a lot of analyzing and dissecting. So you're going to really get to know people in this current state phase, right? So this is really the meat of the learning strategy, because, if you don't understand where you are, you know where you want to go, but if you don't understand where you are, you don't know the gap, right? So that's why we're having these conversations. And it's amazing to me, really, I have to be honest with you, how many times when I'm, I'm talking with organizations and really, they don't ever really do this at this level. Even when I was a learning leader in an organization, when I went to the business, they were like, nobody's ever really come and talked to us like this before. And so this is such a wonderful opportunity, current state. This is where you really do, get that broader systems thinking cap on. You need to start looking beyond, the business goals, but also what's the surround of that organization that could be impacting performance as well. And how many times, when I'm doing these interviews and I'm talking to people, and then I go back or the learning professionals are with me, and there's like, wow, I never knew that. And it's like, you just have to go and have a relationship with your business clients. You have to be able to do that. And so here's why being vulnerable, like I said, really helps, right? Because it's a strategic advantage. Definitely it's hard to humble yourself. Nobody likes to go and say, you know what, I think we could be doing better. But you can't imagine the credibility that you gain by being vulnerable and coming forward and saying, look, I think we could do better. Let's talk about that. And how can we do better, right? So this is essential, because I think if you know what's wrong, this is why I never am afraid of what's broken, because if we know what it is, we can fix it, right? So that's the main thing. And it's really, in my opinion, one of the most fun part. I'd say funnest, but that's not a real word. And, to work and, you really get your credibility stripes here, because by the time you're done with this phase, you probably know more than most people in the organization about what's going on there. So the next thing I'm going to talk to you about is future state, right? So this is where you really lend your learning and business acumen. So here, you're ideating about, okay, here's where we are, here's our current state, here's our gap. Now, how are we going to what's it look like in the future? What are the things that we could recommend that would benefit us achieving these business goals, And sometimes, you have to be careful about the solutions that you're recommending, right? Because it requires you here to have a broad breadth of experience. Here's a couple points. A broad breadth of experience about what's out there, right? So we can never, as learning leaders, get complacent. So Kristen talked about DevLearn coming up. You know, you have to know what are the most current things going on in the learning organization. There's lots of places that you can go and do that, be it through like ATD or SHRM, or you go to DevLearn conferences. You know, you're just always like seeing what's going on out in the learning world in the way of platforms, in the way of learner experiences. What are the different ways we serve up learning, so that you understand kind of what's your palette, what can you work with when you're kind of defining the new way that we're going to learn, right? And so I think here you have to have that breadth of exposure of best practice. There's lots of white papers that are out there. You got to understand your business organizations. You need to know about learning technologies and tools, and you know what's going on, the latest models and research are there. It doesn't mean you're going to use them, but those are the things you need to have in your back pocket so that you know what to pull from to create the best recommendations for them. And so, you know, it's not enough, you know, you need enough knowledge to know what's practical and sustainable and how to make those changes take place. Otherwise, you're not going to be successful, right? And your strategy will end up on the shelf. You can't be recommending high ticket volume, high IT things that your organization is not ready to deploy because you don't have the infrastructure, you don't have the equipment, maybe oculars or things that you need to have, and these are budgetary constraints. You really have to have a sensitivity for these things to know that while the latest and the greatest is this, our organization isn't ready for that yet, but how can we get there, right? So maybe not today, maybe not next year, but maybe in 3 years, and that can be part of your strategy. So that's why it's super important to, as learning professionals, to really stay current and on top of what's going on in the world of learning and development, and what's available for your clients to be able to use. And then, of course, is the roadmap. So I love roadmaps, and we're going to look at some of them today because your stakeholders like them too, right? Because you're doing all this great work. You have all this data that you've collected. You have all these recommendations that you want to do. But at the end of the day, your client, your business client wants to know, what's the learner experience going to look like? What is this going to be for them at a level that I can absorb, right? Because you can't get so granular. It's really in your strategy. You're going to have it at a higher level, right? And I think people like those maps. And there's so many different variations of roadmaps, depending on whether you're doing a training learning strategy or whether you're, you know, a broader organizational learning strategy. And we'll see some examples of those. And then implementation timeline and costs. Okay, so this is like the fifth thing that we're talking about. So, and this, why do we have it, an implementation roadmap? Because you're probably, especially if you're doing an organizational learning strategy, you're going to have a lot of things for them to do, right? How we're going to get there. And so we're going to look at some implementation roadmaps that make it so that your business clients can understand what it is you want to do and absorb all the work that it takes to do it, right? Because I'm sure as a learning professional, you may have the experience where your business clients don't really appreciate all that's going on in the back room, right? The learning organization behind the curtain. There's a lot of work. There's a lot of work it takes to make these things you know, effective and deployed. And so it's really helping them understand this is a process, and especially most learning like organizational learning strategies, like the entire thing, are usually up to 3 years of strategy. So there's a lot of component parts to that. If it's a leadership development, it could be a little more scaled down, but you still have to, there's a lot of piece parts that go into making it work. So, and there's cost associated. And while in your learning strategy, you're going to have costs there for rough order of magnitude, right? But until they say what they want to do, because remember, the strategy is a recommendation. Your client does not have to do it all if they don't want to, right? Your job as a learning professional is to get them to kind of buy into your strategy because you believe, based on all that you've learned, that this is the best way to go. So, and it's going to get the results that they need for business results. So it's really important that they see it, they recognize that it's achievable, and they recognize that we can get there. And when you break the cost down, then they can budget for it because they're the people that typically hold the money, right? So they're able to help you get there. Some things you can't be precise about. So like things like we need a learning management system, those costs are very variable. So you can't really, you can give a range, but you can't be specific. So oftentimes in learning strategies costs, some can be finite and some will be more variable costs. So, as you see here, how we're going to inform our strategy, we're going to go here next is really talking about the work, the worker, and the workplace, right? So I'm curious, do we have any performance consultants in the group today? If you just want to put in chat or something like that, anyone who identifies as a performance consultant or as a systems thinker, because I think that's so important for sure. And I don't know, Kristen can let us know if anybody chimes in, but you know what? If you are, you definitely understand what I'm talking about because everything is a system. And what happens or gets done in one area can often have an impact on another area, right? So when we do, a lot of times when I'm doing strategy work for clients, they're like, well, why are you looking out over here? It's like, because oftentimes it's the things from outside there that are impacting performance of where they are. So you have to really have a broader lens and understand the inputs and the outputs to that area of focus that you're on. So like I was talking about earlier, like the target population, if you're not really looking more broadly, you could miss a particular audience, or you might see something that's really creating a huge impact for the group. So that's a lot to consider, I know. And so how do we get our arms around the work? And what I want to go next is to really talk to you about the work, the worker, and the workplace. Oh, sorry. So when we talk about the work, oh, I think we're going to talk about that in a minute. Sorry, I lost my place. So when we talk about the phases of learning strategy development, there's actually 4 is how I bucket it, right? So here again is a framework, right? This one back here was a framework for the things that you're going to focus on. And this one is kind of the work like process that you're going to use. So if we check it up into phases, like a really good project manager should, you're going to be looking at these 4 distinct phases. You're going to have analysis and discovery, which is where you're doing current state, all your interviews. This is the most active and really the biggest part of your strategy work time. And then you're going to come into recommendations, right? So a lot of times with this, this is going to inform the analysis, discovery is going to inform the recommendations. And then with the recommendations, you're going to need to give validation, right? From whoever you're working with, your executives, because you're going to pulse check it. You don't want to hide with this stuff. You want to make them active partners in the development of this. So definitely keep them involved of what you're discovering. What do you think? Do you see something differently? Because the more your business clients are engaged in this process, the more ownership they will feel about it and the likelihood of adopting the strategy that you're proposing. So you have your recommendations and then you'll validate. So a lot of times this will go back and forth, just like when learning and development, when you have your alpha and beta phases, you go back and forth. We need to fix this. We should change this or modify this. I don't know if I agree with that. So it's a little bit of a back and forth here. And then after you've kind of landed on it, then you do your final deliverable, which will consist of like an executive summary and then the different piece parts that we're going to take a look at afterwards, where you really kind of share the research work. How did I get here? What do we do? What are our current state, our future state, right? The gaps, what are we trying to close and what are we going to get? So, and then you do the presentation. And if you've done well and you've built that partnership through this process with your business stakeholders, they're kind of right beside you championing the strategy. That's the goal. It's not for learning and development to be like, ta-da, we did it. You want to be arm in shoulder to shoulder with your business stakeholders. We're a partner. This is our recommendation that we want to do. So this is really essential. So as we talk about getting the work done, if we go to current state and we're looking at it, I showed you earlier, we like to look at the work, the worker, and the workplace. So these are 3 distinct buckets, right, that you look at to really identify current state. So there's lots of things you can look at, and your organization may have their own unique things that you look at. But for me, here's here's kind of like some of just like the top line things that I would go to in each of these buckets. So for the work, I want to look at what are the job descriptions, organizational competencies, job competencies. What kind of reports do we have about retention, performance, that type of thing? What are the policies around whatever it is we're focused on? Job tools that they have or don't have, right? Standard operating procedures that they're supposed to be using that they have access or don't have access to or aren't adhering to. Incentive structures and plans. Are these driving the right behaviors for them in the workplace or not? Or are they really incenting the wrong behaviors, right? So we're not getting the right results. And then we have L&D team structure roles, like how's the learning, so for example, for a learning and development team structure that I do a learning strategy for the organization, I will definitely look at how the team's structured. What's the inflow of the work? How does it go through? And how does it get back out to the client, right? How efficient are we? Are we resourced properly? Do we have what we need to be able to do it? So this is really critical. And then, of course, what are industry standards for the things that we're doing for the business side of it, or even for our side as a learning organization. And then, of course, there's interviews, which are absolutely my favorite. I love interviews with people about the work, the worker in the workplace, like probably the focus groups that I do with executive leadership team. And you want a broad swath of people that you're talking to. And so sometimes you do one-to-one interviews, sometimes group interviews. Like if you're talking to like maybe in healthcare, you might in hospital executive leaders at each of the hospitals, then you might pull all of them together to talk to them for efficiency's sake, right? So there's different ways depending on what you're trying to get at information wise. For workers, I tend to use like some interviews, I may do focus groups with them. It just depends on kind of topically what it is. And then of course, surveys. So I like to survey them to see how they're feeling about their job, the work that they have. Do they think they have the tools and resources that they need? Because this is from the employee perspective, right? And then job observations for sure. Like especially I know in call center environments, I mean, I love to do side by sides and really looking at top performers and what does a top performer look like versus maybe someone who's at the mid range or at the low end of performance, so that you are sensitized to that performance difference and understand it. And then things, like again, here I use job mapping a lot in the work. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that term. Oh, I'm sorry, of job mapping. Um, it's a really valuable tool to really get at what is the work that we're doing and to be able to see that. But back to the worker, and then it's just like, what are the performance results for this group of people, the workforce that we're looking at? And then, of course, in the workplace, again, you're looking at job observation. What's their work environment like, right? Is it conducive to the kind of work that we're expecting them to do? Looking at the infrastructure, what do they actually have that they could utilize? What could, this will inform your infrastructure recommendations possibly. And what job tools do they have available to them and how easy are they to access or not, right? And then the knowledge support thing, that was one of the things I know when I told you my story. This was really huge for them to have this on-demand knowledge base that they used as they were handling their calls in the call center. And then there's a culture scan. So what's the culture like, right? Is it like, is there like, but the different culture pieces, right? So is it kind of a stagnant culture? Is it command and control? Is it more like we empower you? Is it more hierarchical? So these are things that you want to pay attention to because this can impact performance. What's the communication process? How do I get informed of things? What are rewards and recognitions that we're using? What is the training content that we have? And the division and operations descriptions and interviews, so you can understand kind of the way the organization is kind of working together. So these are just some of mine, I don't know. Does anybody have anything they think I missed that they find that's really super helpful and informative for them that they don't see here? You can put it in the chat.
I think everybody might be eating their lunch right about now, just listening to you, Susan.
I hope they're not like, oh my goodness. Well, I'm going to share a tool with you, right? Because we've covered a lot of ground, but as you begin to do your own strategy work, I wanted to share a tool that I created it's not rocket science, right? And this is what I really wanted to help you understand about how to really tackle the strategy work. Does it take time? Yes, it takes time. Does it take project management and planning? Yes, it does. But the key thing is like really it takes what's more important is really thinking through your process and your approach for how you're going to approach the strategy work, right? So um, Kristen's going to put in here a link where we will share this document with you so that you're welcome to download it. But just if I could just do a quick overview for you. So as you begin to say, I think I'd like to do a strategy, especially for all those people that said that they never did one before, right? So use this as a tool to kind of jumpstart your thinking, like the way you want to do it, right? So what type of learning strategy do you want to do? If it feels a little daunting, pick something on the smaller end that you could work on, right? And so if the strategy is initiative, functional, technology, what's the focus? What is it that we're focused on? So you start getting really clear. So then when we talk about your partnerships and relationships, do you have business knowledge in the strategy area of focus? And if you don't, how can you get it? What are some ideas that you can write down and just spark your way? How could I learn more so I'm more conversant with my business partners, right? And then do I have a strategic relationship with the stakeholder? And if the answer is no, it's okay. Don't worry about it. How can you start engaging with that individual? How can you socialize the strategy with the stakeholder? You know, so are you bold and you set up a meeting and say, here's what I'm thinking about after you get a little more of a game plan? Do you find a way to just interact with them and just say, I'd like to hear more from you about how you think we're doing, being that vulnerable player, so you start getting a relationship built with them? These are things to think about. So on the next one, do I know the business goal for the area of focus, right? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. So if you don't, ask. Go find out. What are your business goals? How are you doing it? I'm just curious. People love curiosity and they love to talk about their area and their things. So this is fun because you always get to just be the question asker to get this data, right? And if you don't know it, then how can you get it? But like I said, just ask. You'd be amazed how accommodating executives can be. So if doing a learning organization strategy, what are the strategic goals of my company to which I can enable the attainment of those goals? So if you're looking at, I'm going to tackle the whole learning organization strategy for the next 3 years, I really want to start like amping up our game here and our impact that we're having on the organization. So I need to know what the organization's strategic goals are and how is what we're doing really aligning with that. This is a great exercise I did one time. I had someone I was working with say, okay, what you should do is really look at all the content you have. And he gave me a map that was on tactical up to strategic. And all the content I had, I was plotting it on the map to look and see where it was. And it was startling how much of what we were doing was tactical and how little of it was really strategic for the organization. That's a very simple exercise you could do yourself, and I would highly recommend it because sometimes you just have a lot of content there that's just really not adding value to the organization. So let that stuff go and do the work that's essential, right? Do the essential work. And then what will I do, right? Or review in each of these areas to learn more. So here we go back to the work, the worker, and the workplace. So you've got your grid, you have your own unique organization, fill in the blanks with what's relevant for your organization. And then what is my timeline for development of the overall learning strategy? Okay. So I hope that you'll find that helpful and useful. So I promised you in the next few minutes that we have left, I'm going to show you a couple of samples from excerpts from learning strategies I've done before, because a learning strategy really needs to be visual because you have all this data that you've collected that you just can't type it up in words. So you have to find a way to be able to structure it on your PowerPoints or however you're presenting it, your Word documents. Usually I would recommend PowerPoint because you hopefully will be presenting and not just handing it to someone. You'll get the opportunity to present that. So one of the things you need to think about is the discovery approach. So how am I going to articulate all the stuff that we did, all these conversations that we had, all these dialogues, how many people did I talk to, so that you really establish the credibility for the information you have. So this is kind of your upfront piece. here's what I did. Here's the data gathering I did to kind of get to, this is the baseline for this strategy. And this is super important. So make sure when you're putting it together, it's in a way that the organization can latch onto, right? So here we're talking about, we talked to the leadership team, we did an infrastructure analysis, we did content reviews and rationalization. What do we keep? What do we get rid of? Focus group interviews, how many people? And then, we just sort of articulated here. So, what do we keep doing? What do we start doing? What do we change? So there's different ways, and you can bring your own expertise into this, but you have to make it visual so that also impactful to know that, hey, I didn't just like think it up myself. I actually went out and talked to people and looked at reports and I did this work, right? So for the strategic recommendations, you can keep it very simple like this, or sometimes it can be very much more layered as you present the information, right? So here the organization, was like looking at just how to build functional competencies. It's like develop or tailor these competencies because they didn't exist. They didn't really have them. What are the levels of proficiency and the competency assessments we're going to use? So this is how do we really build that competency-based learning approach for the organization. And then we did content mapping to create learning roadmaps for each of the groups. Then we had like an academy that we created and an intranet design where they could go in and look and see for their role, where they were at. And then of course, what was the orientation and the new content development that had to be done. So this is at a high level, executive level. Another thing is talking about that current state, future state, and impact, as we talked about. Here's just a simple chart, but popping out things so that they could see it. What are the key things that we need to do? But the big thing I always love is, what's the business impact if we do this? If we're here and we need to do here, these are kind of basically your recommendations. What kind of an impact is it going to have on the organization? Because an executive cares about the business impact row, right? So you want to make sure that that's visible and in front of them. Here's like a support model recommendation that was done for different groups. So like what the learning organization would look like. So this is for a healthcare organization, and how do they structure it to be able to support the broader organization that has clinical leadership, general administration pieces, and how would they structure that, right? And so how do we do the work on these things? Some of it's internally developed, some of it's outsourced, some are internal resources or not. So this is building a case for hiring more people in the organization. So here we talked about those roadmaps, and there's a lot of different ways to do roadmaps. So here's a very active one that was done for a call center, talking about more self-paced learning. It was actually a blended learning with virtual instructor-led training, with self-paced training, with a lot of live work, with a lot of assessment piece. And so this is kind of like the journey of the learning experience that they went through to be able to get released out to the floor. So this is like, to satisfy people that are very detail oriented too. Sometimes this is really helpful because they can see the topics are still there. You didn't miss anything. It tied back to other things from the job map that we learned. So these are just different ways to be able to show it. Here is like an onboarding roadmap of what happens at different places. Here's like the pre-boarding, the orient them, onboard them in the job, integrate them into the organization, and then really focus on performance. And so for this organization, here's how we kind of broke up what the world would look like for them. And then a third one here is also just like looking at quick start, acceleration, and kind of induction. So as you can see here, there's many ways to do the roadmap, but the common theme is a visual representation of the learner experience based on what you're proposing. Here I have to share with you is like a learning model and a delivery model. So one thing is, a lot of what you're going to do is, some things are going to be, especially if they're your organization doesn't have a lot of variability in the way you train. Maybe you're just doing everything instructor-led training. But what if you're proposing to do e-learning or virtual learning or things like that? So just a way to help your executives kind of envision all the different ways that you're going to be doing the delivery of your training for the organization. Because packed behind here is probably some dollar signs associated with infrastructure that you're going to need to support that. So, but help them understand how this is really helpful. So for example, with an insurance company I worked with, they had everyone was kind of like in their own organizational silos, and it was really, in different parts of the country, all training the same thing. So what we moved to was really moving more to a virtual instructor-led type of classroom with localized support. But yet everybody, then they could train people across the nation all at the same time, right? Instead of all that level of effort at each location. So it was hugely efficient for them. And then here's looking at more of a learning model for kind of job specific. What are the things they need to know? And how will we focus the training on there? And what do some groups get and what other groups don't get? And then finally, I think here is kind of the timelines and implementation model that we talked about. You can see here the swim lanes. Anybody that has any experience with, like consultancy firms, these swim lanes are really important. And I break them down into these areas of like governance, support, and sustainability model, the infrastructure, roles and responsibilities, and then curriculum. And what you do is just kind of lay out your timeline at the top for the months and for each of these areas. And then if I look at it, I go, okay, I don't have to do all this at once. I can see how over the course of a year, I'm spreading this work out. So this is super important at the end for you to be able to help them understand what's there. But what you have to recognize as a learning professional is your ability to sell your strategy is really reliant on, number one, that partnership and shoulder to shoulder with your business client to help you achieve that. The people that help you build it, give them credit, let them be owners of it, and help almost make them be owners of it, right? Because you don't want to be that person who's holding it all yourself. It takes a village to do this. And then it's show them how to get there, and then be able to let them choose, because they may not choose everything you recommended. They may just choose some of the things, but that's okay. If you're on the journey with your strategy, that's a win for you as a learning leader. So I'll go back last. So we talked about skills for a learning strategy. What do you think are the important capabilities we need for learning strategy after all we just shared today? This is our final and poll.
There we go. Now people are starting to answer. Susan, the link that we gave them went to your website, not directly to the handout. So we're going to have to fix that and make sure that we have the proper link. That's okay. No worries. Just saying as something to talk about while everybody else is taking care of the poll. But yeah, we will make sure that you get the handout and the follow-up email with the link to the recording as well. Not a problem.
My apologies for that.
That's okay. You know what? It's just proving to everybody that this is live. It's not Memorex. And we all have technical difficulties.
So how'd we do?
We are looking at 19 people out of the 30 have responded. I think we could do a little bit better. Come on, peeps.
They may have dropped off.
We know you're there. We know you finished up your lunch and we only have 1 more minute. Oh, it's straight up top of the hour. So now we're running a little bit late. So I'm going to end the poll right about now.
Yeah. Well, the real answer is all of them are important, because you have to have that kind of the learning acumen, you have to have the business acumen, and you have to have the learning and development, the communication component, the emotional intelligence, the cultural awareness. All of these things are so critical. So I would encourage you to leverage the ATD capability model to kind of help you see maybe where you need to kind of shore up a little bit. Leverage that and use resources and find resources to help you get there. I just thank you all for coming. And I know this is a lot, it's dense, right? What I share with you is a lot of information today, but you can do this. You absolutely can do this yourself. And I would highly encourage you to do it. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, everyone, for sticking around. Sorry for some of the technical difficulties, but we appreciate each and every one of you. And you should have a follow-up email in your inbox in the next couple of days. And thank you, Susan, for your time and your talents. We appreciate you as well. And I hope everyone has a wonderful day. Take care.
Thank you, Kristen.